Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. Quiet, please. Thank you. All right, so here we go. We're going to be doing a lesson today on science, and it's going to cover episode number 8, Sputnik. So you'll hear my presentation, and then check in with CNN Cold War, episode number 8, and get all those notes. On Thursday, we'll have another lesson. We'll basically be covering the situation in like the Middle East during this time period as far as the Cold War. And then after that, I'll get you the questions assessment for your essays. That'll be your final. Then you guys can get started on that. And that'll be for next week. Finals, yeah, we're just about done with school. Wow, hardly left the house. But anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and pull up the thing here. Oops, back it up here. There we go. All right, episode number 8, Sputnik. There it is, Sputnik. Wow, it's like, I don't know, maybe that big with these kind of like antennae off of it, you know, like beaming back, beep, beep, beep. It's like, whoa, what's all that about? It's science. This is the science focus episode because science matters. Science brings us all kinds of cool things, like ultimately like astronauts on the moon, but it also brings, you know, the development of technologies that can go boom, you know, like atomic weaponry, things like that. And also the development of things that can like launch stuff from here to there. And there might be all the way on the other side of the planet. It's a big deal, right? That's what we're going to be focusing on here today. Yeah, and is there like a competition? I mean, competition's good, right? I mean, we missed that in sports competition. So we got the United States and the Soviet Union. It's like, what are the consequences of that competition? And like, how much money is it going to cost to get your competition, bring your best game kind of thing? I mean, like if one side does something better than the other. I mean, imagine like how World War II would have turned out differently if Germany had developed the nuclear weapons, or Japan. I don't know, that they weren't really working on it. Germany was, but they weren't able to quite pull it through. They did come up with rocket technology pretty well before everybody else, but yeah, science matters. And having an economy, a strong economy that can pay for the kind of technology and advancements and things like that for your science and so forth, strong economies matter. It's one of the reasons why when we get to ultimately the end of the Cold War, one of the answers to the question of why did the Cold War end the way it did with the United States and the others winning, Soviet losing, one of the answers is the economy. The economy was stronger for the capitalist West as opposed to state-run economy, communists. Yeah, didn't work out as well for them. They weren't able to generate as much. But at this stage, we're going to see, it's very interesting. Both the United States and the Soviets in particular are going to put a lot of money, a lot of focus on science, right? Just like you guys have to take science, even though you don't necessarily go into science. This country, and you for a while individually, but this country needs science. So let's get right to it. Okay. We start with the Soviet Union because, of course, the Soviets were behind the United States in the area of science, at least one particular part, atomic science. Who came up with nuclear weapons first? We did. Were the Soviets concerned about that? Yes, right? Obviously, the Germans and the Japanese are out of the war, but in the Cold War now, the Soviets are very concerned about it. And as we've seen, you've already got it in your notes, we've already seen it touched upon, the Soviets were able to develop an atomic bomb on August 29, 1949, right? So the United States, you know, club membership of one, nuclear weapons membership ended in August of 1949. So how did the Soviets do it? Well, give a lot of credit to this fellow right here, Soviet physicist Igor Kurchatov, right? Known as the Beard, right? He's got a beard. It's cool. And he is going to be the head of their Soviet nuclear weapons programs. And they're going to put a lot of focus and attention. I mean, that's one of the things you get with a totalitarian government. It's like, this is the top priority. Let's not have any argument. Science and defense. Of course, you are going to have to pay for all that science and defense and so forth. And so sometimes things that don't matter as much, perhaps, in that priority system, like consumer goods, there's not going to be as many consumer goods available to the population. But man, they're going to get their science and they're going to get their technology, military defense and so forth. That's going to be way up there. Oh, and Olympic athletes, because got to get a lot of gold medals. So how did they do it? They scienced it, right? They did put a lot of effort into that. So give them credit for their nuclear physicists for doing it, but they also spied, right? We know this, right? We know they spied. The Soviets spied. They had spies all over the place. This is going to be an interesting feature of the Cold War. It's an interesting feature of life right now as we know it. There's spies all over the place. Yeah, just throw technology together and I'm sure it's spy proof. One of the spies that the Soviets had, among others, was Klaus Fuchs. Write his name down. He was actually a physicist, so he was, pretty, he was an important person within the Manhattan Project in the United States, and he passed along information, along with others, to the Soviets. So they were able to develop their nuclear weaponry, in part because of their science, but also because of their effective spying. Klaus Fuchs was captured and put into prison. Ultimately, we traded. There's going to be some trades between the Soviets and the United States during the course of the Cold War. And he's one of the ones that I think we traded to the Soviets. We didn't execute them like the Rosenbergs. I believe we traded them to the Soviet Union. All right. Of course, where were we developing our nuclear weapons technology? We had a number of very important nuclear laboratories across the country. One of the most important one is in Los Alamos. A lot of work being done in Los Alamos. The final testing wasn't necessarily done in Los Alamos. This picture, I believe, is in the Pacific. There was also testing done, a lot of testing done in Nevada. And at that time, they did a lot of above ground testing because it's like, wow, that's spectacular. It's called atmospheric testing, right? You have the nuclear device above the ground, whether like set up there or dropped. Either way, it's above the ground, and then you get this huge explosion. You can see it. I mean, you don't have to wonder, did it work? You get a huge explosion. You can see it. There's like this big mushroom cloud and so forth. And of course, here we go, November 1st, 1952. Hello. We developed the H bomb, the hydrogen bomb. And like, what difference is that to the A bomb? I mean, it's a bomb. Well, here's the details. It was 1,000 times the power of an atomic bomb, for a total of about 10 million tons of TNT, which is, fashion explosive. In other words, it's really, really, really big. This is 1952, right at the end of the Truman administration. Of course, Eisenhower knows as he's going into his 4 years and then to ultimately 8 years, he's like, man, we got weapons. We're going to hold the Soviets to account. Of course, the Soviets are going to be developing what? The atomic bomb? We know that, 1949. Are they going to develop a hydrogen bomb? Yeah, they're going to focus on that. They're going to science the heck out of it. And yeah, they'll develop atomic weaponry. And so, be careful though when you're like, oh, we're going to use our atomic weapons and we're going to use our atomic weapons. I mean, like that could be really bad. We don't want World War III because there goes the planet. We'll talk more about that later. The policy of trying to keep the world from just like blowing up, mad, mutual assured destruction, which actually brings a lot of sanity in, because when both sides know that if they use a little bit of this and they use a little bit of this and it could end up blowing up the whole world, maybe we shouldn't use nuclear weapons. But anyway, got to develop them, right? And of course, if the other side is developing some important scientific technology, got to do it at all costs. Well, now what about that at all costs? What about that? What about it? Should we use all costs? Well, it's interesting because we did a lot of tests in the Pacific. The Pacific was a big, big place for tests. We'd go to some like, island group, like the Bikini Atoll, right? And we blow one up here and then blow one up there. And then the French and British, I'm sure the French, because that's, the British and French, they don't have too much land. We have Nevada. And you're like, blow up these things. In fact, they did this one test. My dad really didn't like this too much because he served as on the USS Saratoga. I've told you about that story, the aircraft carrier that fought in World War II. And they used that one. They were gonna it was no longer going to be continuing in service after World War II. And so they took that ship and a number of the other ships and parked them along, I believe it was the Bikini Atoll, for a big, huge test. And of course, boom, those ships ended up at the bottom of the ocean. right? Bikini, I've heard that also. Yeah, there it is, bikini. Fashion device for swimwear. That was invented at the same time period. Nuclear and anyway, go ahead. But one thing that's actually not so great because, when you're doing the tests and so forth, it's like out in the Pacific, it's like there's fish and there's like not too many people in some of these places. But unfortunately, 1954, we got a little bit of a sense of like how it's not so good. There was a atmospherics test done in the Pacific Ocean. And I want to say, let me see, what was this, about 80 miles from the explosion, and the explosion turned out to be a bit bigger than they thought. And the wind was blowing in the direction of a ship, a fishing vessel, the Lucky Dragon, Japanese fishing vessel, 23 crew on board, and they sucked in some nuclear radiation poisoning. We know this, it's not good to be around nuclear radiation, certainly at high volumes. One of the crew members actually died as a result of that. That cloud, I think this is a fake picture, but anyway, it's the idea, the cloud that made its way. Because if you have atmospheric testing, it works this way. You have atmospheric testing, you got a big explosion, and you got all kinds of dust and so forth going up into the air, into the atmosphere, right? Well, it's radioactive. I mean, like very radioactive. You don't want that stuff. Like basically, it's called fallout, because as the cloud moves along, the particles ultimately come down, the heaviest ones at first, but then ultimately you get sort of like this fallout pattern. Like if you were downwind of like Mount St. Helens, that, the volcano in Washington that, blew up, and then you had all this volcanic ash that was coming downwind. I mean, you don't want to be a downwinder of volcanic ash is just, kind of a pain, but radioactive stuff, it took a while before folks would finally realize that maybe that's not so safe. I mean, like if you're having tests out in the middle of the desert, atmospheric tests, you get big mushroom clouds, and, I suppose you can see them from some distance, but you really don't want to be downwind. I mean, like, what direction do the winds blow? I mean, is it going to be that much? I mean, ultimately, eventually the Soviets, the United States, and pretty much every other country in the world is going to go, let's not do atmospheric tests, because they started to discover that if you were downwind of atmospheric tests, it's not good for your health. That radioactive stuff makes its way into stuff, on the grass, and the grass is eaten by cows, and then the cows produce milk, and then the milk is drunk by children. This is an interesting map, not to freak you out or anything. There's Nevada, right? So you had a whole bunch of tests that were done. And this is the fallout, what the fallout pattern from tests. It's like, whoa, which way do the winds blow from Nevada? Well, prevailing a lot of times, they blow north. They blow north and to the east, kind of along that pattern. North and to the east. So you didn't get so much atmospheric fallout along the Pacific coast, because the prevailing winds tend to go sort of south to north or west to east. And so actually Idaho, Montana, and like the Rocky Mountain and the Plains, the Great Plains states, ended up having a fair amount of fallout, going from late 40s through the 50s and all the way up until 1962. That was the last one. And they have actually, the federal government's like, oh yeah, well, what can we do about that? And they set up a program. So where you have areas with high rates of cancer of the thyroid, that was, drinking the milk and get the radiation. And so you get a lot of kids and so forth, in particular, growing up in those places that had higher rates than average of thyroid cancer and so forth. So there would be some government funding for, remediation, whatnot. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I was born right there, Bonneville County, Idaho Falls, in 1963, right after the things went down. But yeah, not so good. So yeah, later on, when you want to do testing and so forth, yeah, bury it underground, right? So the North Koreans, they've developed nuclear weapons and so forth, buried in the ground. So you got boom, you can tell whether it works or not, because you get this sort of like cavernous thing there. But what you don't get is the big, huge mushroom cloud and all the radioactive fallout downwind. Okay, so let's see what the Soviets are up to. Yeah, they got their H-bomb in 1955. So, wow. So they've got atomic bombs and H bombs, and so does the United States. And how do you deliver? I mean, how did we deliver the atomic bombs during World War II? Aircraft, right? Drop, flying over, dropping. There you go. You know, do either side have the kind of aircraft that can hit each other? Long-range bombers. I'll show you some pictures later on. Long-range bombers. So what do? I mean, if you're a country and you're anticipating this, I mean, like in World War II, you know, if you were living in London and so forth, you had the sirens go off, and then you know, run for cover, you know, maybe in a backyard bomb shelter, or you know, the London Underground, the transportation, the subway system, train system underground. This country, for a while in the 50s, early 60s, and so forth, we developed civil defense, you know, for all those kiddies. You know, so here's what you do. You know, look for the flash. Here's Bert the turtle. Oh my danger, Bert, duck and cover, right? It had clever, catchy tunes that little kids would, you know, it's like game time. Oh, here they are underneath the tables. They're going to protect. Duck and cover. He's smart. He's got his shelter on his back, right? So you need to do that too. These guys are just like turtles with their little tables on their backs. And yeah, that's going to protect them. No, actually, it's interesting because by the time I was attending school right outside of Washington, D.C. in the 70s, I mean, they didn't do these drills anymore. I mean, you know, occasionally they'd have like some siren go off and everyone would ignore it because everyone knew at that time that if you know, Washington, D.C. was going to be, if there was a nuclear war, they're going to be hit with at least, you know, 3, 4 nuclear devices, and it would be like over, right? I mean, over. And in fact, people would look and go, maybe it's better to be closer to the explosion as opposed to far away, because far away, then you just have to die a slow, painful, agonizing death of radioactive poisoning. So anyway, yeah, we'll continue this topic because the threat of nuclear warfare and death by radiation or explosion or whatever is a continuing thing during the Cold War. It's one of the good reasons we never had World War III in the midst of the Cold War, but there was always kind of present. And the science is bringing this, right? The science of nuclear weaponry, bigger explosions are taking place. And of course, then there's this question of like, how many do they have, and do they have the delivery means, and how many bombers do they have, and how far can those bombers go, right? So anyway, in 1955, in the midst of this, President Eisenhower had an interesting idea. It was called Open Skies proposal. He proposed this at a Geneva summit with top Soviet officials, basically saying, hey, you know, how about like you get to fly over our country and we'll fly over your country, and you can take pictures and we'll take pictures. And we'll see how many aircraft we have and so forth. And, you know, no secret, so that we both kind of know where everybody is at. They didn't really go for it. So, you know, are we going to continue? Are they going to continue trying to find out what the capabilities of each side are? Well, heck yeah. You know, you want to find out so you can be somewhat prepared. Although it's fascinating, during this time period, both sides are always concerned that the other side is ahead. And so there's these various different developments. You know, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And are they ahead? And are we threatened? Is there danger? What the heck is going on? Like, so for example, both sides are developing really long range bombers. Remember in World War II, the United States was like, we got to get this island nearer to Japan so that we can launch bombers to attack Japan. Well, by the time you get to the 50s, with the Soviet development of the Tu-95 and the United States development of the B-52, I mean, those are really long range bombers. They can launch from their own territory, Soviet Union, United States, and head over. And if, you know, if the orders were to drop weapons, bombs on the other side. So both sides are developing. How many of these bombers does each side have? Interesting question. But they are big enough, capable enough, and have the range to go a long way. By the way, B-52, there you go, check it out. Rock lobster, living in your own private Idaho. Anyway, cultural context. It's not just an aircraft. It's a band from the 80s. All right. And of course, we have the U2. Oh, another band. Here we go. No, what? Those guys are pilots. I'm sure they're like you. No, they're not. It's an Irish band. U2. What is the U2? There it is. It's a spy plane that the United States has developed to fly way high, I mean, 70,000 feet. It's almost like it's going into orbit. It flies way, way high. And it's, you know, got one little pilot right in there, and it takes pictures. It's taking pictures. And so, you know, we'll send those up higher, we think, than anti-aircraft rockets and so forth, or the highest jet fighters that the other side has. And it's like, oh, what are we going to fly it over the Soviet Union without permission? Yeah, got to get our facts, got to get the information, all right? Because we're wondering, you know, do they have more bombers than we do? I mean, should we be building more? What should be our priorities? I mean, it's interesting because, like, some of you guys may know this, in the 1950s, Eisenhower, gets the federal government to spend lots and lots of money developing the interstate highway system, right? I-84 and all those other interstate highway systems, which is really good for delivering all kinds of various different things through our roads and so forth. But one of the main impetus of having that wasn't like commerce and delivering stuff. It was in case, like in war, our airfields get blown up, then we need to have a place where our military aircraft can land on highways. So much for the overpasses, but I mean, that was part of the idea. We're gonna have these highways all over the place so they could double as a use in case of war to land aircraft, to have aircraft land and take off on it. I think that goal is kind of past by now because it's really hard to land an aircraft where there's overpasses and things like that. But in any event, this is all going on during that time period. Let's see. Oh yeah, I have to say this, right? So Kenneth Branagh here, I believe this is playing the role of Hercule Poirot, right, in the Murder on the Orient Express. Good movie if you haven't seen it. And he's a very good actor. He's British though. He's British, right? He's British. And the British speak the English language differently. They say things like missiles, missiles. It ain't missiles. In America, it's missiles. So even though you hear from here on out a reference to missiles, we're talking about missiles. Okay, anyway, just I got another story if we ever get time to tell you about how when I went to Britain once upon a time and I asked a question at a political gathering, I referenced it as missiles to a British politician. Thank goodness that British politician responded in kind with missiles, not missiles. Anyway, so what's a missile? Oh, here we go. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. Let's talk about these. This is important stuff. All right, so we see both sides making major focus on coming up with intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and this is gonna be a very, very, very big part. This is rocket technology, all right? So the idea behind a ballistic missile is it launches, and it goes up, 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 up. But what goes up must come down. Ballistic meaning it's coming back down, right? So you launch it up, comes back down. Oh, that's cool, right? You guys ever launch rockets and so forth. Of course, the idea behind intercontinental is really clear. You want to go from one continent to another. So the original missiles, some of the original missiles developed in wartime was in World War II. Remember the Germans, they had the V1, V2. They would launch it from one side of the English Channel, launched into Britain. Really was creating quite a fear among British that this is like a really dangerous thing and how do you protect against it and so forth. I mean, like you don't even know it's coming. The Germans weren't able to really develop that as much, and certainly not enough to win the war. But what about the Americans? What about the Russians? Are they going to be focusing on that? Heck yeah. All right. They are. And this is a big, big deal. ICBMs. And we'll be looking at this technology. Who gets out of the gate first? Which is the first country to have successful launching of intercontinental ballistic missiles? It's the Soviets. But they do it in a sciencey, like exploration method. It's Sputnik. October 4, 1957. The Soviets launch, right? These are Soviet ballistic missiles, right? So they got these things filled with fuel and they fire. And typically in order to get this thing, it's almost like you have to develop like a first stage and then it breaks off and those fuel engines break off and so forth. And then you get the second stage So an ICBM is literally like a multi-stage rocket, because you have to have that to kick it up into the higher atmosphere where there's not as much drag and gravitational pull, and then kicks it the rest of the way. Soviets were able to do it. They sent a little satellite there to Sputnik. Now Sputnik is right here in the nose cone, what have you. And so once after, I mean, so that's the only thing that ultimately is going around the Earth, in orbit. There's this little satellite, and it's like going bing, bing, and you could listen in on like some radio device or something. You're like, bing, oh look, the Soviets put something around the Earth. Oh, it's science. Everyone should applaud. Yay! It's all sciencey, except the military applications are clear. If the Soviets can send something that can go up into the Earth's orbit and go around the planet, they can also develop something to go up and come down on somebody else. And when it comes down, it's not just this little blob thing, whatever, going ping, ping, ping. It could be a nuclear warhead. Do you understand? That's why it freaked the United States out. Because they're like, the Soviets can do this, and they can put nuclear warheads at the top of their rockets. And that's a whole lot quicker delivering one of those to the United States, as opposed to like having a bomber, take off on a runway and fly. ICBMs can get there a lot quicker. So you have the advantage, if you got ICBMs, of time, quickness and time. This is hugely important. I mean, as we go through and look at the technology and so forth, it means like, what are they going to come up with? An ICBM, like right in the nose cone, instead of having one nuclear missile? Are they going to develop something where you got like 15 or 20 nuclear? Yes, it's called multiple targeted reentry vehicles. Multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. Like, what? MIRVs, MIRVs. That's coming later. That's later technology. That's like freak out. So you could have like a submarine or something with 20 of these missiles on it. And each of those missiles has MIRV capability with like 15 or 20. You can have one submarine that could take out a country. That's coming up later though. So don't freak out completely yet. 1957, the United States was freaking out because here it is, the Soviets are ahead of us in rocket technology, okay? They did it. The United States clearly is, well, we've been working on it. And so, there's questions coming to administration like, what's going on? What's going on? Why don't we have this? Why are they first? And so forth. Are we lacking? Do we need to put more effort into this? And President Eisenhower was like, we're on schedule with our rocket technology and so forth. Unfortunately, we really weren't as much as we would have liked to be, but, we were working on it. We were definitely working on it. This is fascinating. I'm going to show you the trailer for the movie October Sky. If you've never seen this, check it out. Before the school year's over, during summer vacation, check it out. October Sky. Story inspiring rocket science in the United States, including high school students, including Homer Hickam, who's like with his buddies in West Virginia. They're looking at developing rockets for different competitions and so forth. You even see popping into the film Wernher von Braun, who's like the head of the rocket program. More on him later. But yeah, here's the actor, and there's the real Homer Hickam later on. Let's go ahead and get that ready to share you the trailer. Yeah, you'll really like this one. I liked it. So you guys might like it too. Hope you will. Okay, come on, here we go.
It's the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik as it traverses the October sky.
Did you see Sputnik go over the other night? Anywhere in the world, someone could look up and see exactly what I saw.
To everyone else, it was just a light in the sky.
Let them have outer space. We got rock and roll.
But to Homer Hickam, it was the future.
Sputnik is a milestone in history.
And just maybe a way out.
College scholarships for winning a science fair? I'm going to build a rocket.
You better take an interest in your own town.
Just don't blow yourself up.
Nah, hey, should we get behind something?
What do you want to know about rockets?
Everything.
A lucky one will get out on a football scholarship.
How about I believe in the unlucky ones?
You better have a talk with your son, Elsie. He's out of control.
Would you please sign my newspaper?
H-O-M. This is great, Miss Riley. I learn everything. Uh-oh. Headed for the mine.
You ought to thank the good Lord that you didn't kill anybody.
Things are bad at the mine. Daddy's stuck in the middle.
Well, you put all this nonsense behind you, Homer.
It isn't nonsense.
Sure was exciting watching your rockets go up.
I know I'm gonna be a miner. I've known my entire life. I have no choice.
As long as you are alive on this planet, you have a choice.
From the producer of Field of Dreams, a Joe Johnston film,
Coal mine's your life. It's not mine.
Universal Pictures presents the true story of a boy who risked everything for a dream.
You want to get out of here so bad, then go. Go!
Yeah, I'll go. I won't even look back.
Sometimes you just can't listen to what anybody else says. You just gotta listen inside.
This spring, turn your eyes to the sky and watch what happens when everything you believe in soars.
I don't think we got a chance.
October Sky.
Oh yeah, gotta like that one. If you haven't seen that, you'd really like that. October Sky. That one comes out. Let's see. Let's get this back up here. That came out some time ago. And there you got Homer Hickam, encouraged by his teacher in West Virginia, and he ultimately is going to go to work for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the United States government. You're like, what the heck? NASA. Those are the folks that end up doing a pretty good job in the competition from the United States side. I mean, what do they ultimately accomplish? Like getting men on the moon or something? Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. So anyway, check that out, October Sky. I liked it. Great performances across the board. And of course, interesting, you got like a cameo appearance of an actor portraying the role of Werner von Braun. Oops, oh, sorry, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. More on Werner von Braun later. First, pause. Let's talk about a dog. Laika. He's a Russian dog. And he gets sent up into space. Whoa, something alive in space. And so instead of just sending a Sputnik beep, 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 right? They send Sputnik 2 has got a little dog. The Americans call Curly. It's a girl. Yeah, so they got monitors to check and so forth because, you know, before they send a human, it's something that happens, you know, through science, you conduct experiments and so forth on animals. In this case, they send a dog, right? So what happens ultimately with the dog? Well, the United States were like, oh, shame on you Soviets. They're so mean to the dog and so forth. What did we use? Monkeys? Yeah, we did. We used monkeys. They used dogs. And, I mean, did it die? Well, if you're into Guardians of the Galaxy, you've seen that movie. There's the Collector, right? Which he has, I forget which stone it is, that, you know, the Gallagher eyes, the whole thing blows up. And the Collector, like, loses a lot of his collection, or at least it breaks up and so forth. There it is right there. There's like... presumably, maybe somebody in space found Laika alive and saved it. And so the Soviets, no, it's creative, it's Marvel, but yeah. Let's talk about ex-Nazis, right? Werner von Braun, right? As we know, during World War II, the Germans made some real key advances in a lot of scientific areas. And given the fact that if the war had gone on longer and they hadn't had strategic bombing blowing them up all over the place, they may have developed, who knows, nuclear weaponry. They certainly did develop rocket technology. And after World War II, there were a number of German scientists and so forth who were like, wow, what's going to happen to us? Now, of course, in order to get into like these science programs and so forth, they had to buddy up. And so all these scientists were members of the Nazi Party. Some of them were like, whatever, you know, I'll just stick the badge on, and others were more into it. So there's Werner von Braun with all his Nazi comrades and so forth, and he came to the United States. A number of them came to the United States and were like, whatever, you're not a Nazi, you're going to be on our side. And so he, with his great rocket skills and technology and background, he heads up the effort for the United States to have successful intercontinental ballistic missile rocket technology to send things up. And we, you know, try and try and try. Of course, you know, ours is an open society. We try something and it fails, and it's like, whoa, and bad publicity. Soviet Union doesn't have an open society. They don't have news coverage of all their kinds of things. So if things don't go so well, Soviets don't necessarily know about it, nor does the world. But eventually, with the help of Werner von Braun, there were major advances made. And of course, there's an interesting thing taking place as well here too. In order to make great scientists as adults, you need to make great scientists starting out in their education as elementary and secondary students and college students. And so we have, in 1958, what's called the National Defense Education Act. It's like the first science, technology, engineering, and math education program with a real focus and emphasis. Homer Hickam was able to take advantage of this program, as were others, because we want to have more scientists. And so we're like, hey, we'll pay your college loans and we'll move you in this direction. We'll move you in that direction. There's good money here in this. And so that is going to be part of our effort to catch up and surpass, if we can, scientific technology and development going on in the Soviet Union, right? Now, of course, it's very interesting because, in other areas, we're a capitalist, consumer-driven economy, and we make major inroads. Automotive technology, for example, right? People like cars. They like cars that work. They like things that work. So we had this interesting thing, 1959, President Nixon goes over to Moscow and the Soviet Union. There is Khrushchev. They're having a little meeting. It's very impromptu because they have this display of like a kitchen, right? And you got the American car and so forth, and all these things in the American kitchen, and so forth. And Nixon's making the argument that a free enterprise capitalist economy can produce all these really amazing things, particularly in the area of consumer items. Because when people are able to make enough money and they got money to spend, they want to buy really cool consumer goods. In the Soviet Union, the amount of money that goes to making consumer goods is all decided by the top people in the Soviet system. Of course, their big priority is science, technology, and defense, right? Rockets and things like that. So Khrushchev is fascinating because he will not give up. They call it the kitchen debate because they're actually like hanging out in this like fake kitchen thing of displays of U.S. kitchen technology. And Nixon's going, well, you're pretty good at your rocket technology. I mean, you have to give him that, Sputnik. But, we're better at like color televisions. We're more advanced in color televisions. Khrushchev doesn't give an inch. He's like, yeah, we're going to have better color televisions too. We're going to beat you on all these things. There was one point in time in Khrushchev as the leader, he's like, we're going to bury you. And of course, some people are like, whoa, that sounds threatening. We're going to bury you, right? We're going to kill you all and we're going to bury you in the ground. And Khrushchev apparently was like, oh, no, you misunderstand. We are going to bury you with all the great amount. There's so much Soviet production of really wonderful things. You will feel as though you are buried underneath all of these wonderful things that we're creating. Soviets will insist all the way up until the very end, presumably, that their economic planning can come up with great science, defense technology, and all the other stuff too. Turns out ultimately it's going to be the United States that's going to be able to ultimately surpass the Soviets in military, science, technology, and then also those consumer goods and so forth too. But anyway, very interesting debate that goes on in 1959. Impromptu debate. Khrushchev comes to the United States, tours the United States, visits with Eisenhower in Camp David. And of course, we got this continuing issue of, well, how is the Soviet doing? Can we look? Are you going to let us look? You're not going to let us look? Later, when at the end of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviets make agreements on limiting nuclear weapons and things like that, rockets and so forth. Part of that agreement is both sides get to look. But that's not an agreement in the 1950s. No, we send over spy planes, right? Here we go, right there. Leaving from Pakistan, which is, we'll see later on, is a friendly country to the United States. Gary Powers, a U-2 pilot, flies high over the Soviet Union. His intention is to fly to an air base in Norway, which is one of our NATO allies. He gets shot down, though. Yeah, he gets shot down. The Soviets capture him, and he's alive. And so they put him on trial. Initially, we're like, oh, he got lost. It was like rerouted or something. He intended to go this way, but, he just kind of like went off course. No, he was spying. He got put on trial, and the Soviets, like stuck him in prison, 10 years of prison. What are we going to? Yeah, we are going to trade. We're going to trade for him later on. I forget who exactly we trade for. I think we have to trade several people, some of the people we caught in order to get Gary Powers back to the United States. But that's kind of embarrassing. Right, like one of our guys got shot down spying. I was like, well, why don't you just tell us what's going on? In fact, we find out later on that the Soviets were really, really, really pushing for more ICBM, something better. I mean, they had the initial ones, but they're pushing. I mean, how hard can you push somebody? I mean, push. You guys understand this. You're IB students. You're juniors. It's like work, 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 no sleep. That was like the plan of Marshall Mitrofan von Niederling. Okay, so he was in charge of the ICBM development, and he's like, work, 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 work. I mean, it's like you work too hard and so forth, and you have all these people working under pressure. And it's like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You see the picture right here? Yeah, that's what happened. You had an accident at a Soviet ICBM like development factory. Boom, 189 dead, including the developer, the main guy, the boss, because he was sitting in his chair, like watching and overseeing everything. I mean, he wanted to make sure. There was a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on both sides during the Cold War for this kind of development, but there was no room for error. And that was, you know, a tragic day for the development of the folks that are involved in the Soviet program. Of course, the United States is, you know, we have our mistakes too. But we're putting money in, like $12 billion, more and more and more. And eventually, we finally get some really good, consistent tests on our various different missiles. The Atlas missile, the Thor missile, the Minuteman missile, the Polaris missile. There'll be others. And of course, these are going to be the things that are going to launch. And they're big. I mean, you can put them in silos under the ground so that people don't know where they are, and then have the nuclear war tip start at the very top and have it targeted, you know, eventually to the Soviet Union and so forth. But for a more peaceful purpose, right, you can put, I don't know, like people up there and launch them to, you know, into orbit. It's like, you're going to get people up into orbit? You got a dog. The Soviets got a dog into orbit. But I mean, are we going to be able to do this in the 1960s? Because we're moving into the 1960s. Yay, a new decade, all kinds of possibilities. Of course, we've got a presidential election. Wow, a new decade with a presidential election, just like now, 2020, new decade. 1960, new decade. The president, Eisenhower, obviously couldn't run for re-election. His vice president, Nixon, was running for election as president. Very, very close race. Kennedy, though, the Democrat, was saying, Eisenhower's administration is not doing a good job. We're behind. The Soviets have a missile gap, and the gap is in their favor. They got more missiles and so forth. And of course, the United States technology and surveillance was like, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And in fact, actually, the answer, it says right there, when Kennedy was elected and came in and got the briefings, like, oh, we're not behind. Okay, at least as far as the number of missiles, but as far as the reliability and so forth, you know, it's very interesting because, you know, we're talking about ICBMs for nuclear purposes. You don't need anything alive. You just need to deliver it to the other side. But if you want to put somebody in there, like for science and stuff, this is where things get really interesting. Because in the 1960s, there's going to be a real focus on like human flight in orbit around the Earth, or human flight out of Earth's orbit to the moon. And both the Soviets and the United States are going to be very, very focused on that and spend a lot of money. Who gets the first victory? Soviets. There he is, Yuri Gagarin. Yuri Gagarin, a cosmonaut, same thing as an astronaut for the United States, a cosmonaut, April 12th, 1961. Yuri Gagarin is sent up into space, in orbit, and then he comes back down and lands safely in Soviet territory. Ultimately, a woman is going to be going up as well. I mean, they're the first ones out there. Kennedy will go early on. You'll see this in a later episode, and some of you guys know this already. Kennedy will go early on. Is like, we need to make it a #1 priority before this decade is over. Not only to do what the Soviets have done, because it's really cool that the Soviets have done it, but you don't want to come in second. We want to come in first, to be the first to get man on the moon, human on the moon. Will we? Yep, 1969. And the Soviets are pressing at the same time. We get there first. And that's not an easy thing to do. None of this is easy. But getting somebody to the moon is very, very difficult. You know, no other country has accomplished that. Although China probably will be the next one to do it because they're making it a priority as well. So that's where, oh, that's the next episode. Okay, so this is where we're going to leave it here. And yeah, we got one more. Watch the episode, okay? CNN and Cold War, and then we got one more. I've got one more video for you guys on Thursday, and then we'll get you the guys the essay assessment and so forth, and we'll be good to go there. Okay. All right, you guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you.